Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going deep, really deep into a situation that's, well, frankly, it's pretty alarming. We're talking about Argentina and the state of caregiving in a country, well, a country facing some really tough economic times.
It's a critical issue and unfortunately one that's often overlooked.
Exactly, and that's why we're here, to shine a light on these often invisible struggles. And our guide for this deep dive is well, it's a powerful report called La Cocina de los Cuidados, in English, the Care Kitchen.
And it's an apt title
Yeah.
because it really gets at the heart of how interconnected caregiving is with every other aspect of society.
Right, it's not just about, individual families struggling, it's about the very fabric of a society fraying.
Absolutely. And what struck me when I first read this report was, well, it's not just a collection of statistics and graphs. It weaves in the voices of real people, their struggles, their anxieties, their resilience.
It's one thing to read about economic indicators in the news, but it's quite another to hear about a mother having to choose between, buying medicine or putting food on the table for her children.
Exactly. And it's not just one group speaking out either. A whole coalition. Labor unions, academics, women's rights groups, they all came together to sound the alarm about this issue, which, to me, speaks volumes. It shows just how widespread the concern is.
Yeah, that's a really important point. It's not just an isolated issue, it's a systemic one. And the report doesn't pull any punches. It kicks off with this, well, this gut punch of a statistic. 86%, a staggering 86% of caregiving policies in Argentina have been, well, essentially slashed,
Yeah.
leaving only, wait for it, 7 programs still standing.
7. It's hard to wrap your head around, isn't it?
It's unbelievable. To fully grasp what that means, though, we need to, zoom out a bit.
Mm.
We need to understand the larger economic storm that's engulfing Argentina right now.
Right. Imagine this. Argentina is battling a triple whammy. Their currency is in free fall, inflation is soaring above 50%, and then you have austerity measures, which basically means the government is drastically cutting spending.
It's a perfect storm, and it's hitting families who are already just, treading water, trying to stay afloat. And while this impacts every single aspect of society, our deep dive today, we're focusing on how these cuts specifically impact the unseen backbone of society, the caregivers.
The ones holding everything together.
Exactly. We're talking about the care of children, the elderly, people with disabilities, all those who rely on a safety net, and that safety net has been, well, severely frayed.
To put it mildly, and it's essential to remember that caregiving isn't just about putting food on the table, although that's obviously fundamental. It's about ensuring quality of life, dignity, the opportunity to thrive. When those supports crumble, the consequences, well, they're far-reaching.
So let's put this into perspective, paint a picture for our listeners. The report doesn't shy away from describing what daily life is like for many Argentinians right now. We're talking agonizing choices between food and medicine, constant uncertainty about whether there will be enough food at community kitchens, cutting back on even the most basic necessities just to make ends meet.
And these aren't just hypothetical scenarios. These are the lived realities captured in the report. One person described it as feeling like they're, living on a tightrope, never knowing what new challenge awaits them. Another shared how they've had to sacrifice things like family outings, even new clothes for their kids, just to keep their heads above water.
It's a lot to process. And to truly grasp the magnitude of this crisis, we need to break it down. And we're going to start with the youngest generation. The report reveals it's a truly alarming statistic. The poverty rate for Argentinian children under 14 is, are you ready for this? A staggering 66.1%.
It's heartbreaking.
That's almost 2/3 of all children living in poverty. And a huge part of this crisis stems from the gutting of these crucial programs: childcare, early education, nutritional support, things that are, absolutely vital for a child's development.
It's a domino effect. These cuts to these vital programs, they force women, who are often the primary caregivers, into impossible situations. They have to rely on their own mothers or grandmothers for childcare simply because they can't afford other options. It's a cycle that traps families in a web of hardship.
It really underscores the nipple effects of these policy decisions. But sadly, as we'll see, the impact on children is just, well, it's just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, you're right. The situation for children is beyond concerning. But it doesn't end there. The report also, it shines a light on the plight of people with disabilities in Argentina.
And this is where things get even more, more layered. Because for this group, we're not just talking about government assistance being helpful, it's often essential.
Exactly. You take away those lifelines that support, and it's not just an inconvenience, it has a domino effect.
So true. And the report really drives home this point that, well, it's about more than someone just like missing out on something. It impacts their entire quality of life.
Think about it. Access to essential therapies, gone. Medication coverage, slashed. Disability pensions, just disappearing. It's devastating.
The report quotes someone saying that this lack of support makes caregiving feel complex and frustrating, which, I mean, come on, that feels like, I don't know, the understatement of the year.
It's putting it mildly for sure. And it really highlights the emotional toll this takes on everyone involved, not just the individuals, but the families, the caregivers, trying to provide care without adequate resources. And then you layer these cuts on top of that. It's a lot.
It really makes you think about the human cost of these, I don't know, these policy decisions. You know, they're often discussed in this very, I don't know, sterile language, the budgets and numbers.
Absolutely. And speaking of often overlooked groups, we can't ignore the elderly population in Argentina.
Mhm.
I mean, the picture the report paints is, well, let's just say it's bleak.
It's a double whammy for them in a way, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you've got pensions that are already, let's face it, pretty meager. And then you have inflation eating away at whatever purchasing power they had.
Right. And then just to add insult to injury, the cost of essential medications
Yeah.
skyrocketing. It's a recipe for disaster.
It really is. It makes you wonder, is this just an Argentinian story? Because it feels like we're seeing similar trends, you know, globally.
It's definitely a global trend. Aging populations, strained social safety nets, these are challenges many countries are facing.
Mhm.
But in Argentina right now, it's particularly acute.
It really is. And I think it's important to acknowledge, you know, who's shouldering a lot of this burden. And I don't think it's a surprise to anyone, but it's women, right? Women are the ones often on the front lines of these caregiving crises. Always juggling, always managing, always, well, taking on more than their fair share.
The report is very clear on this point. These cuts disproportionately impact women. They are far more likely to report that their family's situation has worsened, they've taken on more caregiving hours, and forget about things like paid help. They can't afford it.
It's like they're being squeezed from every direction with no escape route. It's like, you know that saying, it takes a village. Well, in this case, the village is on fire, and the very people you'd expect to be putting out the flames, they're the ones being consumed by it.
Wow. That's powerful. And the report really drives this home with this one quote that really stayed with me. One woman said, "I feel like I'm drowning, and the government has thrown me an anchor instead of a life preserver."
Oh, wow. That's heavy. And it feels like it really encapsulates the feeling of, well, a lot of people in Argentina right now, especially women. But it begs the question, what happens if things don't change? If these trends continue? I mean, what are we looking at long term? So we've talked about the struggles, these impossible choices. But what happens if, you know, if these trends just keep going? If these caregiving gaps are never addressed?
The report, well, it really wants to emphasize this point.
Yeah.
This isn't just about, individual families struggling. It's a societal crisis,
Yeah.
and it's going to have huge consequences.
So paint that picture for us. What kind of consequences are we talking about?
Okay, well, for one thing, when you have women being pushed out of the workforce or forced to cut back their hours because they're drowning in caregiving responsibilities, the entire economy takes a hit.
It's true. It's not just about, you know, lost income right now, in the moment. It's about women being denied opportunities, their future earning potential limited, their career trajectories stunted.
Exactly. It's like this, a widening gender pay gap. A whole generation of women held back by a system that's failing to support them.
It's all connected. I mean, a healthy and supported workforce, that's the engine of a healthy society. And if you neglect that, you're going to feel those consequences everywhere.
And on top of that, think about the impact on the kids. Can we really expect children to thrive when their basic needs aren't even being met? When they don't have access to, quality early education? When their parents are completely stressed out and stretched thin? I mean, these early years, they're so critical.
You're right. They're the foundation for everything, for future success in school, in life, in everything. And on that note, I feel like there's another looming crisis that we haven't really touched on yet.
Yeah, and the report brings it up. It's a real concern, elder neglect. When families are just trying to survive, when they're struggling to keep their own heads above water, how can we expect them to also provide adequate care for their aging parents or grandparents?
Yeah.
And without support, it's going to be a public health crisis waiting to happen.
So we're talking about like a perfect storm of consequences, economic, social, and like you said, a potential public health crisis. And it all comes back to this lack of support for caregivers. So with all of this in mind, what's the takeaway for our listeners? What's the so what?
I keep coming back to the report's title, The Care Kitchen. I think it's such a powerful metaphor because it highlights that, caregiving, it's collaborative. It takes a village, families, communities, individuals, and yes, the government. They all have a role to play. It can't just be individuals and families left to fend for themselves. When even one ingredient is missing, the whole dish, well, it falls apart. And right now in Argentina, there are several crucial ingredients missing.
It's a call to action then, not, I don't know, not just a doom and gloom forecast. So that begs the question, if and hopefully when Argentina's economy starts to recover, will there be the political will to rebuild these systems? Will we see investments in the care infrastructure that's been, let's be honest, completely neglected?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's one that, well, the report doesn't try to answer. But I think by highlighting this crisis, by showing the human cost, by, amplifying the voices of those who are most affected, it's starting a conversation.
Yeah.
And that's what needs to happen.
It absolutely is. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. We've really dug deep into how this economic turmoil is impacting caregiving in Argentina. We've looked at the struggles faced by families, by different generations, by everyone. And we've grappled with the long-term consequences of inaction. But beyond the statistics, I think the real power of this report, and hopefully this conversation, comes from the voices, the stories, the anxieties, and the resilience of the Argentinian people. And as always, we want to leave you with something to think about. So here's a question to ponder. What would it take to rebuild this care infrastructure, not just in Argentina, but globally? Until next time, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious and keep asking those tough questions.